It's Catholic Schools Week, and you're listening to Advancing Our Church. Welcome to Advancing Our Church, a Changing Our World podcast about Catholic stewardship, leadership, and advancement. And I'm your host, Jim Friend. Well, happy Catholic Schools Week, everybody. We have a special show planned for you today. Today, we're playing the very best in Catholic education episodes on Advancing Our Church. And if you'd like to listen to any of our Catholic education episodes, all you need to do is visit us at advancingourchurch.com. Go in the upper right-hand corner and click on Catholic Education, and all of our Catholic education episodes will be listed there. Today, we're going to play some featured highlights from those episodes from some of the Catholic school leaders that we have had on the show. You know, it was a lot of fun for me to go down memory lane and revisit some of these episodes and just hear again some of the amazing people who have been a part of our podcast. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed putting it together for you. And so, without further ado, here's our first guest. Our first guest today is Steve Virgadamo. Steve and I had a conversation last summer, and Steve is a nationally recognized Catholic school advancement professional who has trained Catholic school administrators around the country, made a huge impact on Catholic education. And I was just so grateful for the time that Steve spent on this interview and the way that he talks about his own experience as a boy in Catholic school and how that kind of led him to become a leader in Catholic education nationally. So without further ado, here is Steve Virgadamo.
Now, with all of that said, there will some that will tell you, perhaps even my parents might tell you, that my ministry in Catholic education and Catholic school administration began as early as my own elementary school education. Because I will tell you, or they would tell you, that during my elementary years of K-8, I spent more time in the principal's office probably in the classroom. And by the time I was out of 8th grade, I had the equivalent of a master's degree in school building administration from sitting there and watching how well the sisters ran the school. So in some ways, I was probably called from an early age. I tell people today, young people especially, be careful what you pray for or be very specific because God will answer your prayers. And in my case, he did answer my prayers. I did get to fly for a living, but I forgot to tell him what seat I wanted to sit in. That he called me to serve his church, and particularly his schools here.
So, Steve, tell us a little bit about your current role as the Associate Superintendent for Leadership in the Archdiocese in New York.
Jim, happy to. Again, as I previously mentioned, I think the Holy Spirit has kind of guided my life and how I was going to serve the Ministry of Catholic Education, starting out as teacher, administrator, and then one of the pioneers in development for Catholic schools, and then being called to working as an associate superintendent, and then ultimately traveling around the country working with Catholic schools, committed to doing everything we could to keep Catholic schools open. And in seeing 6,000 Catholic schools in 120 different dioceses, I realized that the issues of development, the issues of strategic planning, the issues of marketing, the issues of enrollment management were symptoms of the real disease that schools were suffering from. And I say that because every time I found that there was a great leader in a school, those other issues that we talk about of finance and governance that people would say are the largest threats to Catholic schools today were really not the largest threats. We didn't see that at all. The largest threat was really the leaders in the building and making sure we put the right leaders in the building, and realized that we were not doing enough to necessarily form future leaders for our Catholic schools. I'm of the generation that was formed by the men and women religious who came before us, and I have to admit that my generation assumed a lot about the leaders that were coming into these positions in the future. So when given the opportunity to go to work with Dr. Tim McNiff, and particularly, of course, His Eminence Cardinal Dolan, who is so committed to Catholic schools and so committed to making them work, and knowing how important leadership was, I accepted their invitation to go work in the Archdiocese. And my responsibility is primarily to identify and form not just future leaders, but then work with them when they're in their initial position. I really believe that 70% or more of our future Catholic school leaders are sitting in our classrooms today as teachers. And the difference is that no one has called them to a larger role in leadership, and the responsibility of that belongs to all of us to do just as Jesus did, to tap them on the shoulder and say, "Come, follow me," but then also give them the skill sets that they need to be successful in doing that. That's what that role is all about. It's identifying, forming future leaders, putting them in place, and supporting them for 3 years. We have a 3-year formation program where we support our new principals and our new school leaders so that they can grow. But the role in leadership goes beyond that, because we also have not done enough to form future leaders for our diocesan, archdiocesan leadership positions in church. If you paid some attention to what is now going on across the country this year, there were as many as 10 superintendent searches going on at one time, and many of them came up with just interim superintendents unable to fill those positions because we're not focusing on a pipeline of succession. And I think we need to be doing more as a church to focus in on a pipeline of succession, not just forming principals. That's just the beginning of the pipeline. We need to be forming those that get central office experience, that get the experience to serve at a higher level within the church to ensure the future viability of our school.
You're listening to the best of Catholic education episodes here on Advancing Our Church. Our next guest is Dr. Tim Ewell. Tim is the superintendent for Montana Catholic Schools. Tim's also the host of Catholic School Matters podcast, which I know if you're listening to this podcast, I can't imagine that you haven't heard Dr. Ewell, seen him on Twitter or on LinkedIn or one of the social channels. Tim is a husband and a father, a podcaster, a superintendent, a lifelong Catholic school educator. I really enjoyed talking with Tim. He's got a great way with words. In this clip we're going to play, he talks a little bit about how he recruits in leadership, and sometimes it's the right fit for the person, sometimes it's not. Here's Dr. Tim Ewell.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes, I tend to think of it in a simple way. Like when I was a teacher, I thought I could do better than the principal and the assistant principal. And I thought, well, geez, we need some better leadership around here, and I'd like to do that for my peers. It turns out like they didn't want me to be an administrator there, but I left and went to a different school. And in that move was like, well, I really enjoyed working with students. I mean, I was a coach and teacher, and I thought, well, being an assistant principal and working discipline, that would be kind of fun because, you're working with students all day. So you do that for a little while. And then again, you're like, you know what, I should be in charge here, because I think I would do a better job. And I mean, I know that's like incredibly arrogant to say, but it's
I think anybody who steps up in a leadership position has some kind of thought like that. Like, you know what, I could probably do this in a better way or a more creative way, or, with my own style. Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, that's what, and then you become a principal because you say, I want to work with the teachers. I want to make their lives better. I want to coach them. I want to work with them. I want to make sure that we have the best teachers. And then you're a principal for a little while. I was principal for about, at the time, I think it was about 6 years. This is really kind of a funny story. The superintendent comes to me because they developed this new system where one person from the central office, I was in Seattle at the time. So they had, like 4 assistants and 1 full. And so they kind of divided it up, and like they would come out and do kind of an evaluation with you and your pastor. And so he didn't really know me very well, the superintendent. And he says to me, so I guess here's my question for you. What do you want to do? Like, what do you want to be? And I think what he meant was like, is this the school that you want to end up, or do you see yourself in a different type of school? Because I had previously been in a high school. This is a very small, struggling elementary school. So I think he was assuming that I would say, like he was going to give me some career advice about, oh, well, here's a school, maybe go there and you'd be happier, so forth. And I was like, yeah, I want to be a superintendent. And he was like floored. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I want to be a superintendent. And he's like, why would you want to do that? And I was like, because I want to work with principals. I want to make their lives a little bit better and coach them up and give them some leadership. And yeah, that's what I want to do. He was like, he was flabbergasted. He was just like, I can't. Wow. And he goes, okay, well, let's see. And so he starts running down like superintendents in the state, in the area, like that might be retiring or openings. And he's like, I mean, I guess I'll just keep you in mind, if one of those things open up. And I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, like, and I was like, I've just answered your question. Like, and so like at that point, like then, that was 2 years before I came here. So like in those 2 years, I was like, okay, what kind of jobs are opening up? What are they looking for? Who's getting those jobs? What is their background? And so I would start to learn that. And so then this opened up and I was like, this is a cool gig because it's a one-person show. Okay. So like I literally, not only do I not have an assistant superintendent, I don't even have an administrative assistant. So I'm doing things out of my car. I mean, I do have an office, but people call my cell phone, people text me, everybody does. And so, but the thing that was cool was I would learn personnel, policy, Catholic identity, curriculum, leadership, accreditation. I would just get to learn it all. Whereas I think if I went and became an assistant superintendent, you would generally have one or two functions at one of those larger dioceses, and then you wouldn't know about the other things. So like that was what was cool about this gig.
Yeah. So what would you say if a young guy said to you, Dr. Ewell, I think I want to be a superintendent?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that's great because I enjoy it. I love it. It's a great job. So I would say that, but I'm also really careful because I think what you hear a lot is people say, "Oh, that's nice," and then they because they're afraid to say, because there are people who become leaders who shouldn't be leaders.
Well,
right?
Sure, yeah.
That they're, it's not a good time for them. It's not a good match for them, or it's just not a good thing. That just because you're a good principal doesn't mean you'll be a good superintendent. Okay, just because you're a good teacher doesn't mean you're a good principal. So, I mean, I always say to people, look, are you like, if you're really serious and you want me to mentor you and help you, I will, but understand that I'm going to ask you some tough questions and I'm going to give you like my honest feedback. And I've told people, I mean, I told a guy that applied for a principal job and I looked at his resume and we didn't interview him. And he called me and he was like, why didn't you hire me? And I was like, do you really want to know? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, you've had 5 jobs in the last 7 years and your last 2 positions have ended abruptly. And so to me, I think what you need to do is take a step back and you need to go back in the classroom. You need to be a leader at your school and work your way up again, because right now you could take the next job. And then if that one flames out, you're done. Like no one's ever going to hire you. So, and he was so angry with me. He was so angry. Like he told people, like it came around like, hey, I hear you, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, man, I was just he asked me for my opinion and I gave it to him. And so I'll do the same thing. But I tell you what, if there's people, I mean, what generally happens more frequently is I say to people, listen, you need to think about leadership. And they're like, no way. And I'm like, no, you need to think about leadership. Like this is, you've got what it takes to do this. And they're like, nope, don't want to deal with the hassles, the headaches, the conflicts, the parents, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, nah, you get through it. You'll learn the skills. Like that's not the worst thing. Like you can make it. So more frequently, I'm trying to recruit people that I see. I'm trying to tap people on the shoulder who I see have potential. But more frequently than people coming to me and saying, I want to be a leader. How can I?
You're listening to the best of Catholic education episodes here on Advancing Our Church. Our next guest is Jennifer Trefelner. Jennifer is the Director of Communications and Social Media Strategy for the Diocese of Palm Beach. Jen has been on our show twice now. She was just on last week with Nick Regina. Jen joined us in September and talked about data-driven strategies for communications. She did a fantastic job. Again, all of these episodes are up on our website. Jennifer here talks a little bit about strategies that should be differentiated depending on what generation you fall in as a parent. And so she talks about really targeting in on Generation X versus millennials. Here is Jennifer Trefelner. Are more schools now working with a marketing plan probably than they were maybe 5 years ago? I sense a stronger focus on that as people, because of the climate, because a lot of schools are struggling or recognizing that, enrollment is a challenge. Parents don't just make that decision automatically anymore. They need to be convinced. They need to know that there's a strong academic program as well as the spiritual benefits of being part of a Catholic community. Are you finding that schools are being a little bit more maybe aggressive with having a marketing plan?
Absolutely, Jim. I think schools nowadays, they have to be strategic in their communications and their marketing. And based on the competition of the different schools that have definitely improved in that realm for their own communications and marketing, our Catholic schools throughout the United States are really putting a big push towards doing just that, which is very wise. So, we understand that research shows that parents are picking schools and students are picking schools for various reasons. And as we're able to really showcase that information, it's definitely in the best interest of these schools. And I think they're moving forward with that as a general trend.
And I know you've talked a little bit about, from your own presentations, some of the factors that parents look at in choosing a school. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Right. So definitely the perception of better academic quality, religious values, safety, structure, and discipline in this day and age has been paramount in people's forefront of their decision making. And I think as Catholic schools can talk about that specifically, it definitely will behoove them. Balance those value-added options, which are activities and leadership opportunities, kind of that faith formation that also provides for schools and students to be able to become leaders in a specific area. So when I was working in the Diocese of Allentown, I oversaw school marketing for the diocese, and we kind of put together a group called the Bishop's Commission for Catholic Schools, and I think I've talked about this on the show before. But it was a group of business folks that really looked at the marketing and the business end of running the schools. And we had a big debate, a big discussion about, does a parent choose, when they choose a Catholic school or they're deciding on the education piece, what is the most important piece? Is it the faith formation, or is it the academic piece? Like, what is the first thing you think that they look at? Do you have a position on that? Sure. So I think parents nowadays, depending on what generation they're coming from, are looking at a myriad of different things. And a lot of them like facts, and they like proof that not only are you saying you have strong academics, but these are the data points or the proof points behind them. They want a holistic education, so they know their kids will be educated mind, body, and spirit. Also touching on that, moral and spiritual development, I think is important. Plus, another key component recently has been individualized attention. So I think that parents they're pretty savvy shoppers nowadays.
Sure.
And so as they seek to address, do they want just an academic school or do they want something that is for their faith? I think they're looking at the whole package, and they're really doing their research on websites and through school tours and shadow days and social media as well.
Oh, I totally agree. And even something simple like making sure that your website is mobile friendly. We know that, what is it? I don't know what the stats are today, but I know a few years ago they were saying, 60-70% of the people that access the web are going to do that on their phone. It might be even higher today.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, definitely. That is a key component for sure.
So going back to communications plan, what does a robust communications plan include?
We touched on a little bit about those different components that can be added in. So if your school has already a social media plan, the comprehensive advancement or development plan, enrollment management systems, that crisis communication plan is very essential. Plus things like a branding or identity guide, all of those can be included in a robust plan, which should also include things such as, your vision and mission statements. And then you're able to kind of flesh out there the goals, the audiences, your short term for like 1 calendar year, and then long term, which would be 1 to 5 years for your objectives. Plus strategies that can coordinate with each of the audiences that you seek to reach through the different objectives. And of course, a key component to this plan, too, is to also include the budget details for what you anticipate those costs to be.
Who are the stakeholders? Who should be involved in developing this plan?
So depending on what each school has, and, if you've seen one Catholic school, you've seen one Catholic school.
That's right.
But, right? So some schools have a development director or a director of institutional advancement. Some may have a communications team. So whomever is going to be the point on this should definitely collaborate with the advancement committee of the school advisory council, the administration of the school. If you work with your diocesan officials, definitely to keep them in the loop as far as the approval process is concerned. In addition to collaborating with other entities that already have a plan such as this in place, so you can learn best practices from them.
There are so many great studies out there on different generational trends. The world changes so quickly with technology and the focus. How do the generational trends impact a communications plan?
I love this question. So one thing I love to do is, work with different schools for them to really understand who their target audience is. So if you're trying to reach those in Generation Z, which are, folks born typically from like 97 to 2015, you understand that 97% of them own a smartphone and they are on that smartphone more than any other generation. So they're averaging about 3.5 hours for daily use. They also really value social causes and embrace multiculturalism. So if you want to reach them, you may want to use a digital video platform. Research is showing that's really what they're geared toward. Also, perhaps have a school-branded Snapchat filter. If you're looking to reach millennials, which are, 22 to 38 years old, they say that millennials tend to work smarter, not harder. They're very tech-savvy. They're multitaskers. So if you're going to be placing ads on social media, you would want to gear those towards Instagram or Instagram stories where it's really eye-catching. You're very direct with your marketing information because they're multitasking while they're looking at those ads. If you're designing something in your communication plan where you want to reach parents of like middle school and high schooler students, maybe they're Gen X parents, you want to really lean towards Facebook. And this generation, typically speaking, likes those data points that I referenced earlier. And Gen Xers can be skeptical. They really want tangible results. So maybe do more infographics with that group. And on the other side, if you want to reach boomers, and maybe these are folks you have identified as donors or alumni, perhaps grandparents of the school, we know that they appreciate emails, and they also are on Facebook. So they're less influenced by peer pressure, but they kind of have that bigger picture perspective. So curtailing your marketing messages for each of those generations really will help to drive home the messaging on the platform where they are active.
You're listening to the Best of Catholic Education episodes here on Advancing Our Church. Back in the spring of 2019, Changing Our World held a webinar to talk about the future of Catholic education, and it was conducted by our very own Brian Crimmins, who is the CEO of Changing Our World, and Matt Russell, the Chief Advancement and Business Development Officer for the National Catholic Education Association. And in this conversation, Matt and Brian talk about the report that we published last spring. Brian really focuses on, in this segment, about philanthropy, the opportunities for innovation, and Matt talks a little bit about the offerings of NCEA and their focus for the Seton Symposium. And so without further ado, here are Matt and Brian.
When Matt talked about some of the early conversations we had, I always felt I had a good understanding of what NCEA was doing, and it turned out I didn't even have half a clue to some of the great work that the team does with everyone on the phone's clear partnership. And I know, talking to Matt and the other leadership folks at NCEA, we had our own experiences of having worked in 35 plus different archdioceses and more than 500 Catholic elementary and high schools and more than 1,000 parishes, that we understood sort of the dynamics, the challenges, but also the opportunities. Again, from our perspective, that I felt when we got further into discussing how we could put some of our thoughts together and some of our ideas together, you're now seeing an outgrowth of that. So just thank you to NCEA for the partnership. We're certainly thrilled on our side. And, this webinar is just one example of hopefully the continued good work together. To get us started, just as a way to maybe level set and kind of give everyone a perspective of when we think of philanthropy and we think of fundraising, what does it mean in terms of what today's donors are up to? If you can try to put them into a big box and kind of get an understanding of what they're interested in, it's important to know that they are changing. I think donors from even 10, certainly 20 years ago, why they give and how they give and by which means, with use of technology, et cetera. I think a lot of some of the very basic rules that used to be in play for a long time in the world of fundraising are up for grabs. What's not different in many ways about today's donors is that they're really hands-on in many cases, looking for tangible results. The days of being a phenomenal Catholic school, sort of being quote-unquote good enough, are quickly coming to an end, for better or for worse. Donors looking to see if we're truly moving the needle in the work that we're doing. Things like ROI, terminologies. Increasingly, the next generation, Generation Z, is one of, has a social bent, a global awareness. Again, thanks to the technology and social media, they're just aware of a lot more information, have access to more information, which I think is one part of what's made them who and how and the type of donors that they're going to become and are. It's also the Generation Z specifically, born after 1994. He or she is keenly aware of their own experiences. They've lived through 2 wars. They've lived through a recession in their short lives already. They are facing increased sensitivity around debt. And a lot of this is what's driving their focus and their ROI metric-driven approach. From a global standpoint, they're also beginning to show clearly that they are, with their purchasing power, are looking for companies that have strong ethical and moral compasses. And I think if you layer that in again to the great works that the Catholic schools do and you all do, if we get our messaging right, I actually think this next generation, all generations, but increasingly this next generation, our message is really, really strong and will certainly resonate to them. And so I think if we think of that and we think of, one other note before I close this part about today's donors is that I haven't had a chance to give a speech about this topic in and of itself. The one thing I do want to make note of and point out to the audience here is that women are becoming, for that matter, are actually here as the main leaders in philanthropy. And again, men and women and the differences of how they give is also something that all of us need to be continually mindful about today and certainly in the years ahead.
So I think one of the first things that we need to talk about as we begin to frame the conversation is let's remind ourselves, what are the challenges that we're facing? And clearly one of the biggest challenges that we all face and we know is that we are facing a significant decline in enrollment and numbers of school closures nationally. As we get down into the regional aspects, some regions are seeing much more strength, much more resilience than others based on demographic shifts. But overall, we know there's a lot of pressure on our enrollment numbers and our school numbers, especially at the elementary level. Over the past decade, we know that we have decreased the number of schools and population by at least 30%. Unfortunately, that pace continues, especially at the elementary level. The secondary school market has seen a bit more stability, especially in the number of schools. So the secondary schools have a little bit more stability within their ranks, but they're also under increased pressures in terms of funding their schools, keeping competitive modern programs available to the students and the families that are a much more discerning audience now, I think, than they were 20 years ago. And so that's a real challenge that we face. And schools are no longer able to meet all of their operational needs based solely on tuition collection. And so the need for subsidies within the operational budgets of our schools is growing every year, and with an increasing amount of pressure put on those subsidies. And those subsidies come from the parish, they come from the diocese, they come from outside funding organizations and foundations. And while the schools are finding themselves in a situation where they have a growing need for those subsidies, those funding organizations themselves, especially the parish and the diocese, are under increasing pressure to have those funds available for what the schools are going to need. From an enrollment perspective and from a subsidy perspective, there is a lot of pressure that is put on our organizations. Brian?
Yeah, and one of those is certainly the educational options, meaning there are more out there, whether they be charter schools, whether they be more successful and more funded public schools, certainly more options for families to consider, even homeschooling. So I think I know in some of our communications work that we've done, when we've been able to go out and do focus groups, it's just a certain reminder. It hits you in the face when we talk to parents. The options are there for them. Unfortunately for us as well, the Catholic Church, with no means a surprise to anyone on this call, finds itself in the news, often on the front pages with what's going on. And so that will probably be with us, unfortunately, for a few more months and years. Any chance I get, I'm screaming from the mountaintops about the amazing work that we have with Catholic schools, hospitals, Catholic charities. So I hope not to get lost behind the headlines is the amazing work the church as a whole does, and certainly for this case, education.
Yeah, another great challenge that we have is finding and retaining effective leadership. One of the things that we know is that schools with great principals tend not to close, and schools that don't have great leadership tend to have trouble being a great school. So finding effective Catholic leadership for our schools is paramount. How do we find them? How do we retain them? How do we train them to be more effective as Catholic school leaders is a challenge that we face. For a positive spin on some of these challenges, that is one of the areas that we can have the most direct effect in the shortest amount of time by finding good leaders and giving them effective ways to be trained to make them better leaders in today's schools.
Yeah, and one point is the last one here is an important one, I think, when we think about the challenges we face, and that is the ability to innovate. And so I often get a chance to talk to groups about when we think of even fundraising, there's tremendous pressure even within nonprofits to find unrestricted dollars. Many of today's donors I covered will often restrict their giving, and that's often, in my opinion, it can be great. But behind all that is something that's potentially dangerous, and that is the need to innovate. We need organizations to continue to try, even if that means we try and we fail. That's okay. That's part of innovation. And I think certainly of these challenges that Matt and I just took you through, and there are others as well, certainly, innovation is going to be somewhere in here as a through line of what helps us figure our way out. And so I encourage all groups and all organizations to continue to try to be as innovative as possible. And for many donors, being open, being honest about the need to innovate is something that's great. It gets them at the table and gets them wanting to sort of see that as well. And I think that is one area, one aspect of what will help us propel us forward towards some of these very important challenges and difficult challenges that we face.
You're listening to the best of Catholic education episodes here on Advancing Our Church. Our next guest is Jason Morrison. Jason is the CEO for Catholic schools in the Diocese of Scranton in Pennsylvania. Gavan Mooney, who is our president for client services here at Changing Our World, caught up with Jason at the NCEA Seton Symposium, and they had a nice interview. In this clip I'm going to play, Jason talks a little bit about a model that he is using to implement to move his Catholic schools forward in the Diocese of Scranton. And what's so interesting about this clip, he talks about the urgency and the need to move forward quickly. And so in his own words, here is Jason Morrison.
And Jason, you've obviously been involved from a professional perspective, working with Catholic schools across the nation for a long time. So the genesis of what you're doing in Scranton, is that as a result of learnings from across the nation in terms of best practice, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it is actually, as we drive forward with a new vision in our diocese, a lot of it is looking back at some of the research and some of the things that not only NCEA has done and funded through the Perceptions of Catholic Education. For example, within that research, really outlined what families were looking at when they think about their educational choices. So in the diocese, we are really taking a strong approach to enhancing and ensuring that our academic quality is the best in the region. So we're investing $1 million in STREAM education, which is really forward-thinking, cross-curricular, and gets into all of the 21st century skills needed today, for students to really be successful, not only in school, but beyond. So it's really being driven by, some of my experiences looking at different models of best practices across the country, and then some of the research that NCEA and Vatica have done.
Great. And streams of science, technology, religion, engineering, art, and math.
Yes,
is that what the acronym stands for? Why stream? Why is that the focus?
So I think, stream is really a differentiator for all Catholic schools. Anybody can do STEM. And I think a lot of our public schools, in public school districts, we need strong schools looking at those skill sets, and they're doing it. Some people have, started the foray into STEAM, so adding the arts component to really get through and start to think about working collaboratively and creatively, which are two really important skills, but nobody else can do STREAM. So we add the religion piece, which in today's society, is needed now more than ever. I mean, we need socially responsible citizens that are looking at the complexity of the problems facing our society now and into the future. I think a lot of our, one of the speakers was talking about it earlier about the change coming from within. I think that's coming from within in Catholic education. We need that, but also in our society, the change coming from within, is really going to involve people thinking about not only the problems, but thinking about them in a socially responsible way. And we have the opportunity to be able to do that with the Catholic and our faith piece, with Christ as the best example for that.
So obviously we have a lot of listeners who might be superintendent of schools, might be educators, leadership within diocese. When you look at Catholic schools, both individually and in aggregate in terms of system of Catholic schools, we obviously have lots of opportunities, but there are lots of challenges as well, financial, operational, et cetera, et cetera. What would you advise in terms of your first steps that either a diocese or a superintendent of school or school representative or leadership to look under the hood and really understand how they can make a difference in terms of sustaining Catholic education? What recommendations or ideas do you have for those first initial steps that they can take to ensure the future viability of their
institutions? It's a great question. I mean, I would say, just as you alluded to, a lot of people are afraid to look under the hood. You have to look under the hood. And you have to be comfortable with what's underneath the hood, and you have to be honest and open with that there may be, as you said, there are, of course, challenges. I think every one of those challenges is an opportunity. So how do we take that and turn that into an opportunity? No different than even just going back to that research on perceptions of Catholic education. I think perception is reality. What I say to our principals is we have the opportunity to change perception about what we are and how we become what we're going to do. So to do that, though, you got to take a look at really what's underneath that hood, and you have to. I spent a lot of time when I first started. I went to every school. I started talking to constituencies. I was talking to parents. I was talking to alumni, and finding out what do they think about us. We actually even mirrored that perceptions on a national level of Catholic education. I talked to a few people in our work in our area about, okay, well, let's take and see, does this research really even apply to us? A lot of people are going to say, oh, that's national research. It doesn't apply. Right. So I said, let's take this and let's do our own research. And believe it or not, our own research mirrored exactly what the national research was saying. So, I would say take that time to really look into that. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. I've said to, to our principals and working with them is that we have to act with urgency. We have to execute, and it's okay to fail. So let's try a couple of initiatives. We've launched 2 big initiatives in our diocese. Some people might say, well, why don't you just do one in the first year, of your work? And I said, well, we just don't have the luxury of time, as everything is changing. So, so challenge yourself, take a look underneath that hood and really be honest. And if it's okay if something's not great under there, be honest about how you're going to approach it and how you're going to fix it. In a couple of our schools, to be honest with you, our test scores weren't great. That's okay. So let's talk about that and see how we're going to change that and then move that forward. That's really what it's all about.
You're listening to the best of Catholic education here on Advancing Our Church. Our next guest is Mark Freund. Mark is the Executive Director of Lasallian Education. Again, at the Seton Symposium, our very own Kaitlin McTighe, who's the Managing Director for Changing Our World, had an interview with Mark, and they talked about Mark's experience of the Lasallian education, both as a young man and now as a Catholic school leader. So without further ado, here is Mark Freund.
So talk to me a bit more about the relationships in your own personal experience, through Christian brother education that touched your heart and brought you to where you are today as the executive director.
I fell in love with the brothers when I was a high school student. I grew up in a town in Baltimore where there are 2 Catholic high schools in our part of town that people in my grade school traditionally would go to. And coincidentally, it's one of the nation's oldest Thanksgiving Day football rivalries between the Jesuit Preparatory School in Baltimore, Loyola Blakefield, and Calvert Hall, the first permanent Christian Brothers ministry in these United States. So I fell in love with the brothers as a high school student way too many years ago for me to even mention here. But I still go back those days. I think I not only learned the elements of history and math and religion and all the other subjects that I took. I think that the best teacher I've ever had in my life was was a member of the community who taught German in those years. I think that the relationships and the model of relationship that was built and modeled by the teachers and brothers, both the LaSallian partners, the teachers, the lay teachers, as we might call them, and the brothers, really stuck with me. When I got out of college and I went to work for the arch rival across the other side of Towson, I was blessed. I was, other than the good-natured ribbing that would go from both sides, the alumni friends, my alumni friends, and my friends at Blakefield, I was blessed to learn a different way of looking at teaching and interacting, and it was a good one. Again, I have no criticisms. But what stuck with me with the brothers, and it stuck with me through my years even working in diocesan ministries, was the centrality of relationship. And it was the relationship that you built with the individual, with the young person, in whatever circumstance that it was. You don't stand there and scream and yell if you're the principal of the school at someone who did something wrong. You try to figure out what it was and how you can best go forward in a pastoral way, whatever the end result might have to be. So I think that the relationships that I built with teachers and staff, I'm still friendly with teachers who taught me more years ago than I would care to count. And we still find that even in our 40th reunion, which was a wonderful party a couple of years ago, we not only were blessed to have the brother president of the school with us, and as well he would, it's an alumni event, it's something you would expect. But to have 5 or 6 teachers who taught us in the 1970s come back to share time with us, I think speaks very well to the charism of the brothers, the Christian schools, and the LaSallian family schools in these United States.
Definitely. The longevity is really remarkable, and it's certainly very special, I think, to the Christian brothers, which is amazing.
We have, the tagline. Every organization that does a marketing study or a branding project comes up with a tagline, and I hate using it, to be perfectly blunt, because taglines always tend to sound artificial, but in a very real sense, ours is accurate. We've been transforming lives since 1680, right. And it's a ministry that we relish and cherish, and we go forward with every day of the week.
That's amazing.
You're listening to the best of Catholic education here on Advancing Our Church. Last but not least, today we have Colby Academy here in my own diocese of Allentown. So glad to have Dr. Brooke Cortese, the Chancellor for Catholic Education in the diocese, and Mr. John Petruzzelli, who is the principal at Colbe Academy. We had a terrific interview right before the start of the school year, and in this clip, Brooke and John talk about the opportunities for Colby and how it began.
Prior to being in the diocese, I worked in public education, and my role in the public school system was special education, was my background and passion. So I used to oversee special education programs as their director, and a lot of the responsibility was to find appropriate programming for students. And what I experienced is 9 times out of 10, when there was emotional and behavioral issues at the high school level, there were substance abuse issues also going on with that. And some of the programs that were available really were subpar academically and did not have addiction and recovery supports at all. So it was really lacking. And it was something that really concerned me in having to place students elsewhere, but knowing they weren't going to really get what they needed. So it's just something that kind of stuck with me as a concern and an issue, and I wanted a solution. So simultaneously, when I really was recognizing this, I was approached by another recovery school that's in Philadelphia, actually, that was opening, kind of like what we're doing, but this was back in 2008, and I thought this was a great concept. So I went and learned about the recovery high school model with intensive recovery supports and what that could look like, and it really inspired me to do some more research. And I found out at that time there were about 50 recovery schools nationally that existed. So this was not a new concept, but not something that we had here in the Lehigh Valley. So it really was inspiring to me. And I kind of took it and continued to do some research. But for me, there was something missing. And I wasn't sure what exactly it was at the time. But I do believe that was God's hand in leading me not only here to the diocese, but to help understand the spiritual aspect that is really necessary in a recovery high school model. So coming into the Catholic school system, I learned about that, experienced that, and simultaneously learned how valuable and necessary it is for long-term recovery. So addicts that achieve long-term recovery, which is considered 10 years or more, attribute that to their spiritual journey. And so for me, that just made sense. The spiritual aspect, strong academics, which is what we have, and recovery support. So put that together, started to get involved in the community, approached, at the time we had an administrator, not a bishop, because we were in between bishops, and said, this is some of the community work we're doing. And I'm just making sure there's no conflict of interest with our value structure. He was super excited and said, this is great. We should open one. So kind of gave me permission to continue to do the research here locally. He said, put a business plan together, talk to the Board of Ed, got support from our board, put a business plan together, and then we got a steering committee together, which is actually where John got involved. And we've made it come to life. So it's been a really wonderful experience.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I would imagine, John, your excitement of coming back to the Lehigh Valley and getting involved with this project. I mean, you came in as a volunteer and now you're going to lead this school. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Brooke talked about, the hand of God, and I think that's really what it is. I remember 4 years ago when I was still principal here in the Valley at Bethlehem Catholic, Brooke was on a panel discussion after a documentary about a recovery high school, and she invited all of us from the diocese to go. And I remember watching that movie, Generation Found, about Archway Academy, the recovery high school in Houston, and walking out with a colleague and saying, that is really cool. I would love to do something like that. Never in my wildest dreams thinking that, 4 years later, here I am doing it. And, I started initially with the committee. I left for a year. And then as things really started to gear up, Brooke invited me back to be on the committee, and I think she was thinking other things other than the committee, which was fine for me now.
Again, God's plan.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And, you get in there, and it's hard not to be excited. It's hard not to see the passion that other people have and to know that we really are saving lives with what we're doing. And, when the opportunity arose to be principal and, it was just such an easy decision to say yes, and I feel really blessed to not only be in the Valley, but to be working with Brooke and the diocese again, and incredible leadership with my Bishop Schlert, not my senior Schlert anymore,
Right.
but
Sure.
to have his faith in me to lead such a special project. It's really humbling, but just so exciting.
Yeah. And when you look at, addictions like here in Pennsylvania and in the Lehigh Valley, do you have a sense of how we compare with other parts of the country?
Sure. So definitely. And that's one of the reasons that this is a response to the need in the community. So Pennsylvania is the fourth highest in its overdose rates nationally. So there's clearly a need. There's a pocket of overdose between New York, Philadelphia, and right here in the Lehigh Valley. And we're a conduit between New York City and Philadelphia. So it really leaves us quite vulnerable. Definitely we are high on that list nationally. No pun intended there. So it's a response. So not only, with adults here, but it's the adolescents. And that's really the struggle and quite frightening. In starting to do the local research that we did, the school is going to be located between two counties, Northampton County and Lehigh County. So in digging into that and talking to the counties, each county itself is doing about 1,000 drug and alcohol assessments for kids ages 12 to 17 annually. And out of those 2,000 kids, at least 90% of them are being referred for further substance abuse support. So, and that's only the kids that we know, only the kids that are going for those assessments. So there's definitely a need, and our schools struggle, not just Catholic schools, but our public schools struggle with how to meet these needs for students because none of them have recovery supports within their school system. It's just not something that they do. Yet that is where the kids get their drugs. So it's really this dichotomy that we're dealing with in education, and we know we need to respond to it, because if we can get the kids this support earlier, then we decrease their chances of overdosing when they're in their 20s and 30s, and that's where we're seeing the really high rates.
What an amazing story. Colby Academy, such a tremendous impact that they're going to make on so many lives. I knew that you'd want to get an update on this important story, and so I called up Brooke Cortese just to find out a little bit more about how the fall went in their first school year. And so here's a brief clip from my conversation with Brooke. Well, Brooke, welcome back to the show. We're so glad to have you. Congratulations on all your success this first year at Colbe Academy. I assume it's been going well?
It has been an amazing year so far, and thank you so much for having me back on to share an update with you.
So tell us a little bit about the first year.
So I think there's been a lot of excitement in anticipation of students joining us, and I'm happy to report we have 7 students and 2 pending. So we are thrilled with that, and it's been really a blessing to be a part of their journey, to watch them walk through the door on day 1 with the anxiety and low confidence that they have in beginning this journey. And now watching so many of them. We had one student just celebrate 100 days and another student celebrate 6 months. So it's been really a blessing.
Brooke, I remember I wasn't there, but I saw the pictures of you and the bishop. You guys were cutting the ribbon on the new school with John Petruzzelli, the principal. That had to be somewhat of an emotional moment for you, right? I know that you took this from its infancy. This was kind of your baby from the beginning. What was that like, cutting the ribbon on a brand new school after all that great work you did?
It was surreal, quite honestly. I purposely paused to enjoy the moment. I could get tearful thinking about it. And having it come alive and looking around at every person that I could note exactly how they were involved in helping it come to fruition was just overwhelming. I had such joy in my heart to know that the way the Spirit has been guiding me was able to come alive with the community. And it's just so exciting to see it continue to grow.
Yeah, I'll bet. And obviously very rewarding to see the kids and the families that are benefiting from those services.
Yes, the families are a special part of this. You know, I mentioned the students' transformation over these last few months, and the families too. You know, over Christmas break, Mr. Petruzzelli and the staff and the families went out to do some activities together. They had a whole day planned. They had lunch. They went out and did something together just for fun, to spend time together. So the relationships and support structures, formally and informally, those bonds that have formed really are an example of what a faith family and our community is all about. So that's been really unique, I think, to Colby, because so often our schools engage our families, but this is at just such an intimate level because of the unique struggle they have with a child with substance abuse disorder. Again, it's really neat to watch those relationships grow.
Brooke, what is give me one of your greatest surprises, greatest joys of the year so far?
Greatest surprise and greatest joy of this year so far, I would say greatest joy is celebrating the 100 days with our first student that enrolled, in watching that transformation, being an intimate part of working with the family and the student. We had a special day at the school that was set up That really brought me the greatest joy, because that's what it's all about. For us to be able to know that we impacted his life, and he now has a foundation in recovery that can carry him moving forward, and to see literally the light in his eyes turn on again. And that's just been amazing.
Wonderful. Well, Brooke, thanks for coming back on the show and giving us a little bit of an update. We'll stay in touch, and good luck with the rest of the school year.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
And that was the best of Catholic education here on Advancing Our Church. On behalf of all of us at Changing Our World, we want to wish all of you a very happy and successful Catholic Schools Week. If you'd like more information about our show, please visit us at advancingourchurch.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Advancing Our Church is a production of Changing Our World, a fundraising and social impact consulting firm which has been advising both nonprofits and corporations for the past 20 years. For more information, please visit us at changingourworld.com. Well, that's it from me, everybody. Have a terrific week. Take care, and God bless.